Hello, everybody. Thanks so much for joining me. I'm back. I took a few days off. It was the weekend, Super Bowl, Valentine's Day, stuff like that. I don't really have an excuse at all. I was just being really lazy and I just needed a break. So, but I'm here. I'm here now. So let's talk about the Freedom Trucker Convoy and how it has now inspired more countries to take action against their government's vaccine mandates. Check this out. Hundreds of people, guess where? New Zealand, protesting vaccine and mask mandates. They drove in a convoy to their capital on Tuesday. The protesters staked out in front of Parliament as lawmakers return from their summer breaks. Look at those crowds. That is going on in New Zealand. So that is pretty amazing. Now, of course, Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern decided not to meet with them as she delivered a speech to lawmakers outlining her priorities for the year. Right now in New Zealand, you are required to get vaccinated. It's mandated if you're a teacher, a doctor, a nurse, a police or military person. But remember, Jacinda Ardern has made it very, very difficult to live life in New Zealand as someone who is unvaccinated. And she reveled in this. Remember when she was asked by a reporter if she was creating two classes of people for the vaccinated and unvaccinated by implementing these very strict, not mandates, but vaccine passport rules around New Zealand. And she smiled and said, yep, that's exactly right. That she was happily creating two classes of people. So apparently people in New Zealand not so happy with it. And now the convoy has spread all the way from Canada to New Zealand. But New Zealand has actually been spared the worst of the pandemic after it closed its borders and implemented strict lockdowns. But now, despite all of these mandates, the country has seen a recent surge in cases and Omicron. So you could see here that, the mandates are going to hold off the virus for a bit. These lockdowns are going to hold off the virus for a bit. But ultimately, you're still going to end up getting hit. I mean, you just can't outrun a virus. And I've been saying this from the beginning of the pandemic. Like, is this really our strategy? We're going to lock down and then what? When we open up the door, the boogeyman is still there. You're going to have to face him at some point. And New Zealand's having to face him. And they're just, look, now, especially with the world saying we're just going to live with COVID, there's no way for New Zealand to have a zero COVID policy. There's no way for anyone in the world, unless they're going to be an isolated community where they're going to have no one coming in or out, like a little prison, a prison island. And maybe New Zealand wants to become that. I wouldn't be surprised. But if you want to be a prison island, then maybe you could keep the virus out, except you can't really because you still have to have imports and exports. So there's no way to do it. A COVID zero strategy is, at this point, insane. And New Zealand continues to try to go in this direction. But people now in New Zealand have had it. They're saying time to get back to normal. Now, look at this. Arrests have been made, and police are telling protesters to leave as the protest is now on its third day. So they're cracking down on the protesters. They don't want them there. But the Kiwis aren't the only ones hopping on the bandwagon. The Canadian trucker convoy has spread not only to New Zealand, but to Europe. A European convoy is well underway. Check this out. Truckers from Helsinki, Belgium, France, Italy, the Netherlands are all reportedly heading to Brussels. So really incredible that these protests are just spreading, and they call it fringe. They say, oh, this is just a group of right-wingers. I'll tell you what, if you see the protesters in New Zealand, you can't sit there and claim that they're right-wingers. They're the native people. They look Polynesian. They're not right-wing, white supremacist, racists, right? So, but that's kind of the narrative that's out there at this point. But thousands of people have gathered, look at this, in France in this week in solidarity with the Canadian truckers. You see some of them flying the Canadian flag. Most of them flying the French flag, but there they are. And they are protesting alongside the Canadians, alongside the New Zealanders, alongside. Now we've got the Israelis have a convoy. Like I said, Netherlands, Italy, all of these various places all throughout Europe are now joining in on these protests. And, and they're saying they've had enough with the overreaching government. How they said 2 weeks, that 2 weeks has turned into 2 years. And people are now fed up and people want to get back to their lives. And this is, but what is government doing as these people rise up? What is the government doing? The government is just ignoring them, saying, well, we're in charge, we're the power, you're just the little people. So it's going to be an interesting moment, I think, as governments continue to try to crack down on these protests and as people rise up against all of these various different mandates. At some point, the governments are going to have to get rid of these mandates. The issue is, I think the governments, and I think a real question, and really the thing that we have to keep our eye on is, what is the end game for the government? Because at this point, the virus is going away. So there's no reason for them to continue these mandates. The only reason why they would continue these mandates is to exert power, which I think a lot of people have been kind of sounding the alarm on, saying this is just a power grab. This isn't really about science. Now, at some point, COVID is going to have to become endemic, and they won't be able to implement mandates for COVID as easily without seeing these uprisings. Now that people are rising up saying, I've had enough, if the government were to end the mandates and then in the future bring them back, what do they think would happen? I'm pretty sure we know what would happen. People would rise up and say, whoa, 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 no, not again. So the fact that the government is unwilling to negotiate or talk to or even acquiesce to these protests shows us that they are wanting to hold on to this type of power so that they can try to wield it again, maybe not against COVID, but against other things that they want to wield it against us. They want to use that power against us. And so these protests are not only going to spread across the globe, but they're going to spread into different people as well. Right now, there might be people that are against the protests, but the government just has to do one more thing for that person and then say, okay, that's enough. I've now had enough and I'm joining the protest. And I think that's what we're saying. So, and when in history have people rising up and protesting around the world like this? When have they been wrong? When have the protesters been wrong? I would like to know when large swaths of, I mean, we've of course seen fringe protests that are genuinely, truly fringe, you know, where no one shows up to these like white nationalist, racist protests that, of course, everybody on the left wants to call all of these protests that they're not in line with. They say, oh, that's just right-wing, white supremacists, Nazis, right? But those protests that are actually for that type of ideology tend to be extremely tiny, like 20 people. So when has large groups of people that have risen up against their government, when have those people been wrong is a good question. And maybe you have the answer to that. I would love to hear from you. You can email me, kim@kimiverson.com. All right, I'm going to wrap it up. This is just a quick one for you, somewhat, I guess. Please join me on my locals community. I am doing a live stream today there. I do other live streams. Also, you get behind the scenes stuff, and everybody there in that community posts. Sorry, I'm really tired. I woke up really early for Rising this morning. I had to be up at like 3 something in order to do the whole show today. So I'm a bit tired and I'm fumbling over my words, but you'll forgive me, right? Locals, go there. A lot of people post a lot of great stuff. I'm going to be doing a live stream later today after I take a nap, and the link is down below, so be sure to check that out. Thank you so much for watching. I will be back.